We're actually going to do a class in session tonight. Um, I really wish I would had paid attention to one of the responses on my channel sooner. I wish I would have paid attention to it at all because I'll answer the questions and I just keep going. A lot of times I don't even look at the video. I will just answer historically whatever issue is brought to me. And this particular person was just really going on and on. And it was pretty much about their foundational claim was that there is no race in American politics. And there hasn't been. And I wanted to read it verbatim, but it really harkened me back to my video about this miseducation to American whites being more severe and more purposeful and more advantageous to the ruling class for whites to not know American history than it is for black folks. Because I would bet money that this person considers themselves not a racist person. I really would bet that. And racist to white people is different than what a racist to black people means. Racist to white people means I don't like you and I want something to happen to you. That's not what encompasses racism. Okay, that's not when your ideologies, when your politics, when your plans harm me systematically, and your plans support those who do harm or do lessen me, that is this institution of racism. It's not just the physical lynching. But I have heard a lot of white Americans feel that there is no racial dichotomy in our political system. And I mean, we have the Naturalization Act of 1790, slavery, Dred Scott, Fugitive Slave Act, the Trail of Tears, Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the poll taxes, Jim Crow, convict leasing, Plessy versus Ferguson, voter intimidation, the identification requirements, literacy tests, brown bag tests. Literally centuries of organized dictation of who can and cannot participate. This began immediately in the 1790s. Once they said, okay, we're going to have a participatory government, they immediately began talking about who does and does not get to participate. Number one, women. Women could not vote until 1920. White women could not vote until 1920. The rest of the women could not vote until 1965. Okay, because after white women got the right to vote, they fought for all other women not to get the right to vote for another 45 years. After they used these ladies, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, to bolster their numbers to make a national presence in suffrage. Native Americans could not fully participate in the United States government until 1968. Black people, despite the Reconstruction amendments, because they were ignored, because you got to think lynching, Jim Crow, Plessy versus Ferguson, segregation, all of that is after slavery. They weren't lynching during slavery. I mean, they would lynch, but the terrorist idolization of lynching came about after slavery. And all of this is about protection of wealth. So, okay, let's say that these members of the American populace don't know American social history. Law, Fugitive Slave Act, the 19th Amendment, the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment are all racial and gender coded language saying that we have to stop or start this particular affirmative action. All of these policies and laws, the Philadelphia Plan by Nixon. Nixon had to tell the unions, if you will not let Black people in the union, you can't have government contracts. What has occurred? Now, let's just back up. This is stolen land and wealth protected by laws. So none of this is right. Just because something's legal don't make it right. And this is not an accident. This is the same thing that happened in India. This is the same thing that happened in Africa. Second-class citizenship, inability to travel freely, inability to own land, inability to participate in government, gender inequality. The only difference is they committed a almost complete genocide of the indigenous people here. And the Black indigenous people just got pushed into slavery. But the African indigenous people here, they didn't die from the diseases the European had because the genetic code of the African wasn't susceptible to it. But they didn't get their land back. They just got pushed into non-land ownership because of their genotype. They got aligned with the people who did not have those rights. Now, the people that I'm talking to, many of them who are answering this are my age and older. So we're not talking about great-grandfathers. We're talking about parents. If not them, I was 7 years away from being an American citizen. I was born 7 years after, 6 years after the Civil Rights Act of 1965. How can we dismiss the multitude of legislation that has separated people from wealth and access and act as though we have an impartial system when it's the same system? It was after the 1965 Civil Rights Act that they did redlining. It was after the Civil Rights Act of 1965 that they did the war on drugs, first starting with Nixon, then militarized by Reagan. Then we went from the war on drugs to mass incarceration, and everyone who these people admire, Democrat and Republican, said, you know what? That was wrong. That disproportionately affected Black folks. When they knew what they were doing when they did it. And one of the champions of that, Trump. Trump asked Clinton, everybody knows how I got rich. How did you get rich? You're just a lawyer. You weren't rich, your husband wasn't rich. How did you get to be rich? How are you raising hundreds of millions of dollars? Because of all that money you made those people during the war on drugs. So it's not just the social part of America that American whites are dismissing. That's why it is so offensive when you hear if you saw my situations and circumstances, perhaps you would act differently. But again, you know, we've done many videos on this about cognitive dissonance, but to have discourse with people that I can tell that they are coming from a sincere place, that they really believe this. Now, you have to go far out of your way not to know all of these things. You have to purposefully dismiss hundreds of years of imbalance in the economic community, in the political community, in the housing community, in the education community. How long has the Kerner Report been in place? 1967? Yet we still have whites saying that it's an even playing field. How many times have whites proven? Hey, look at the law. If you think there is no clandestine plan against Black folks, look at the laws. Look at the laws of the country. From the Declaration of Independence moving forward. Just study American law, study American legislation. It's not just Black folks. The Trail of Tears, they took the United States government to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said the natives were right. And Andrew Jackson just said, man, we're going to ignore the Supreme Court, and we're going to take all this stuff. And once we take all this stuff, we're going to protect what we have by legislation. But this is the same country, when Israel came back to take their land, oh, that's not genocide, it's not wrong, it's not none of that. And then when the Africans right now are taking back their land in South Africa from the colonial descendants that came and oppressed and took their land and made laws to protect what they stole. Now, when they're using violence to take it back, all of a sudden, we can't have that. is this a willful ignorance? Is this a miseducation? Maybe there's a Carter G. Woodson book in the making for white America. The miseducation of the white American. Because either the white populace has no education or they have a miseducation. But the story is economics. It always has been. We started off colonies that were income property for Europe, particularly for England. We were made on a financial model. It goes all the way back to Pocahontas, a woman, not a man, where they extracted from her influence how to process tobacco, and then they killed her. Look it up. Within 4 years, it wasn't long. And when England multiplied its investment because of the tobacco, they killed her. Now they got the money, and that's what made all of the rest of the colonies come about. Jamestown, Virginia was crumbling. The white men that came would not work. And John Adams, I think was his name, who was in charge, said, if you do not work, you won't eat. So it wasn't these heroic European white men that came to build in the new frontier. No, they were dying. And they would have died if the Native Americans didn't feed them. That was actually the original premise of Thanksgiving. The sitting down, look it up, the sitting down between the Native Americans and the Pilgrims. But the Pilgrims actually weren't the first people here. They weren't. The Pilgrims actually got here in 1620 on the Mayflower. The way that I remember that is because the first slaves got here in 1619 on the White Lion. Same place, Jamestown, Virginia. I believe that I believe that Plymouth Rock, I believe, is in Massachusetts. New England, same area. Which also means that Black folk, even if you don't account for the indigenous Black folks that had pyramids in Florida, if you don't believe me, look up the Florida flag before 1980. It's pyramids on it. If somebody says it's mountains, ask them what mountain range has ever existed in Florida. Those are pyramids. Even if you take the indigenous Black folks out, the indigenous Africans that had been here for eons, we're going to take them out. 1619 is when the first Blacks got off a ship here as slaves. Now, they weren't the first Blacks to be here because there were other Blacks that had come as apprentices and free men like that. But Blacks got here before the Pilgrims did. It's just fact. Look it up. 1620, 1619. There is a difference between somebody that is arguing passion and somebody who is arguing facts. You can have your own opinion. You cannot have your own facts. And if you can also not combat facts with opinion. Show me where I'm wrong. But going back from the beginning, this country was a place to make money. And once they saw the money that they were making, they wanted it. So they backbent on the deal and fought off the people that they made it from. And they definitely wasn't going to share it with not just minority people. They weren't going to share it with white people. And they're still not. That's why most of us are broke. Most of us are working poor. Even the ones of us who are doing well, making $100,000 and $200,000, do you understand it's people making $100,000 and $200,000 per transaction? A lot of people. Even those of us that are doing well are not the power brokers of this country. And because we were made to make money, our government was made of the people who were the ruling class. They protected it once they had it the way they had it. And look at the video on Bacon's Rebellion. That is how the system was set up to create poor whites and poor immigrants fighting, while this elevated group makes all the money. And that is the structure that we have to this day. And you look at every law since the anti-miscegenation laws from 1681, and you will see legislation that protects wealth. In fact, in 1681, in the anti-miscegenation laws, that's when white became a class. Before that, people of European descent were nationalists. They related to each other by, I am an Englishman, I am an Irishman, I am an Italian. That's how they related. There was no homogenous recognition of this group as a monolith. And it definitely wasn't an equality to it. So white at that time just meant a descriptor. There was no power, there was no advantage associated with that title. That is. Now, you have people who say, well, I'm white and I had a hard life. What you have to understand is to participate in the government from 1790 to the 14th Amendment, 1868. Yeah. You had to be white. It said it. So all of the wealth that was accumulated from that time to that time put that group ahead. So it's not saying that because you're white, you did not have a bad life. It was saying you did not have a bad life because you're white. So every problem you have, Native Americans got to deal with being Native American too. Black folks got to deal with being black folks too. In a lot of ways, to an extent, women got to deal with being women. But because of our family structure and our social structure, a lot of women do better than other women just by their connection to this power structure. But then there's still, in the bottom line, the easy way to follow this is you follow the money. Has it gotten better? I love when I hear the dominant culture say that. The greater population say that, I should say. Well, things have gotten so much better since then. Okay, how much wealth did Black people own in 1865? 0.5% of the wealth. Today, Black folks own 4.7. I mean, 0.47. They own less of a percentile, greater in number, but less of a percentile. So if you have maintained basically the same reserve, where's the progress? If all of these laws have been put in place to help Black people, and it's funny how the person who commented was saying they had Black fatigue. All of these things put in place to help Black people. Okay, well, number one, if you know those things were put in place, you also know of the resistance that immediately came to it, the backlash that came from it. And where are the fruits of this investment? Because you know who benefited from affirmative action? White women. That's why women who are the numeric majority suddenly got to be a minority, because they would rather give the money to their wives, daughters, and children and sisters than us. So, we're going to continue the history and politics, and
Attention, the UTA
we
library
are
will be
going
closing in
to
1 hour at
continue
11 p.m.
the
Again, the UTA library will be closing in 1 hour at 11 p.m.
At the library. Yeah, you know. We're going to continue with the historical framework associated with history. But one of the best things that we did with starting history and politics is what made me start it was when Trump made that move against education, particularly American history. And I'm seeing we were caught, Black folks, in our feelings about being excluded. But that's about controlling the majority. And as long as the majority can be kept ignorant and fed hate, because the same system that keeps us disenfranchised keeps you poor. That you recognize. I had a hard life. You probably make more money than me. It's the same system, and that's what they don't want you to do. The same system that keeps Native Americans, women, Blacks, Latino, all my immigrants, same thing that keeps them disenfranchised keeps you poor. And you vote for it. Why? Because they keep you ignorant. And you've been ignorant so long, it is easier to fool somebody than to convince them that they have been fooled. You are married to your benefactor, just like a lot of Black people were married to whites as their benefactor. That was why we wanted to integrate. We wanted to integrate with people that committed genocide, who stole land, who suppressed women, who tried to bring Black folks into the country by force and then ship them out once they were done with them. That was called colonization. Look that up. Abraham Lincoln took that over. Those are the people, the wrong end of the fire hoses during the civil rights movement, the KKK, Woodrow Wilson, the most racist presidents, Andrew Jackson, the people who committed the Trail of Tears. That's who we want to integrate with. That is education. That is sophistication. That is morality. That's who we want it. There's a lot of learning we all need to do. And no matter how you feel, I impress upon you to just check what you're feeling with facts. And whatever you feel your fact is, if your fact is less than 100 years old, find out where your fact came from. Go to the beginning of the country and move forward. Then go overseas and you will see the same thing. The only difference is that without a complete genocide, that ownership of the land looks different. See, with the native gone and so much 200 years passing, Americans believe that the United States, that the majority population are the original and rightful population. Well, you know that's not so in India. You know that's not so in South Africa, in different parts of Africa. But the English did the same thing there. It's just strikingly obvious that claim cannot be maintained because the indigenous person is still there. They've, of course, fooled Black folks into, because that's the education that we were brought here. And do you notice with all the technology, okay, fine. Back in the day, maybe they didn't know no better. But we know about African history. We know about African custom. We know about African resources. We know about African civilizations. We know about Africans' educational systems. But Black history always starts slave to where we are now. Not complete civilizations developing Europe, then slavery, now where we are now. I'm just saying, you all know they have the information because they print all the books. So they know where the people came from and they know the traditions and history and accomplishments that existed. But when they teach about American Black people, they'll say, oh, they came from Africa and all they were these just downtrodden people. Not dentists and doctors and astronomers and astrologists and architects this is. And that's how they teach Africans. Like Africans had no history before they got there. Indians, no history before they got there. And because the financial system was caught up under European, in this case, English control, you had to be educated their way to compete with them. You had to be educated in their laws to compete with them. So your mindset was them as the reaching point, as the pinnacle. That was the standard of excellence. And I'll end it with this. To the genius or geniuses that say, well, you went to a white institution and got your PhD, and then you're going to talk about white people or whatever. Black and white people say that. That is embarrassing to you. Because when you get a doctorate, you're there for your research, not somebody else's.